The 600 economists that reject Brexit are the very same economists to whom the Queen, if you recall, after the 2008 catastrophe, addressed a letter with a devastating question. Why didn't you see it coming? And they spent 3 months concocting the longest apology in the history of social science.
So we shouldn't.
To have those same economists, us lot, with our wonderful predictive powers, and George Osborne's figures are utterly dodgy. They're not worth the paper they're written on. Let's face it, this is a one-off event. It has never happened in the history of the world for a country like Britain to leave a union like the European Union, which means you have a sample of 0. And therefore, any attempt statistically to pin down what this will mean for mortgages, the value of the pound, the trade and so on, it's not based on any scientific fact. The discussion we should be having should be about sovereignty. It should be about the effect of a Brexit on Europe, on the British people. This is the discussion we should be having.
I think British trawlermen feel they've been cheated out of fishing rights that ought to be theirs by birth. And they believe only by leaving the EU can they regain control of the waters that provide their livelihood.
20 years ago, this harbour would have been packed with fishing boats. They'd have been stacked 3-4 deep. Now the fleet is just a fraction of the size it used to be. And the fishermen say that is all the fault of the European Union.
Trawlermen are angry because they feel they have lost control of their own waters. The Common Fisheries Policy sets quotas, telling fishermen exactly what they can and can't catch. It was designed to conserve stocks, as well as allowing equal access to the fishing grounds for boats from other EU countries, like France and Spain.
This industry is not so much a job, but a way of life. And to see your whole heritage and your whole way of life devastated for a political project, we're ultimately being made to beg for our own fish from Brussels' table, and it's a national tragedy what's happened to the fishing industry, and it's what's happening to the country as a whole.
Outside the EU, Britain is the region's foremost knowledge-based economy. We lead the world in biotech, services, law, education, the audiovisual sector. Outside the EU's clinical trials directive, we're again at the forefront of medical research. Outside the EU's rules on data retention, Hoxton has become the software capital of Europe, the Silicon Valley of this part of the world. And our older industries have revived too. Our farmers, always more innovative than their continental rivals, are exporting all over the world. Our fishing grounds have once again become a great renewable resource. And outside the EU's energy boondoggles, fuel prices have fallen back to world levels, leading to a revival of our steel, cement, ceramics and plastics producers. but we've been able to lift our eyes to more distant, more opulent markets. Markets to which we're linked by custom and kinship, by language and law. For the last 10 years, every continent on this planet has experienced significant economic growth, except Antarctica and Europe. When we joined in 1973, the 28 countries that make up the EU were 36% of the world's economy. Today, it's 17%, and it's dropping virtually by the minute. We no longer have to pay £20 billion, gross £10 billion net every year for the privilege of belonging to the world's only stagnant customs union. As the Eurozone continues its genteel decline, Britain has become the leader of a wider European bloc, those 22 European states and territories that are linked to the EU through a common market, not through political union.
Things just started getting a bit more tense. People from the Black Bloc and protesters just started like throwing water bottles and other pieces of garbage to the police. Let's πάμε μπροστά.
Ήρεμα ρε. Γυναίκες ρε, ήρεμα. Πρόσεχε. Ανήσου. Είμαι δημοσιογράφος. Εντάξει.
Καλά είμαστε.
Ελάτε από πάνω. Σηκωθείτε και πέτετε. Άντε στον διάολο καμιόντε. Άντε στον διάολο καμιόντε.
Forget the new X-Men, forget Captain America, we're seeing that soon. Today, London's Leicester Square will play host to the world premiere of Brexit, the movie. Let's have a look.
In this film, I want to spell out the choice before us. Do we want to live under a Europe-wide government, a vast state machine, which few of us understand, run by people we don't know, with the power to impose laws on us that we haven't debated, and have little or no power to overturn?
You cannot be a self-governing democratic nation and a member of the European Union. That is impossible.
We now seem to talk about going on holiday with a single currency as if that was the highest aspiration of mankind. But surely one of the highest aspirations is to have the dignity of self-government.
Matt Hancock, on this Treasury short-term report, they said if we left the EU we would fall into recession. How deep does it say that recession would be?
Well, it says that there will be a recession, as in more than 2 quarters of negative economic growth.
But how deep? How bad would it be?
Well, it'd be bad for people who lost their jobs.
But how I mean, we lost 7% of our GDP after the 2008 financial crash. How much is the report predicting this time?
Well, the report predicts that the recession would be 4 quarters long, and that growth would go negative. And it comes
by how much?
Well, there's numbers for each of the 4 quarters.
Yeah. How much are they?
Between 0 and -1 in each one of the 4 quarters.
No, it's not actually.
It is actually.
The central forecast is that for the period you predict a recession, the loss of GDP is 0.1% per quarter. Well, I'll repeat that again, 0.1%.
And what about 0.1% negative involves hundreds of thousands of people losing their jobs, people losing their livelihoods, and the key is this: it's not just the Treasury. It's the Bank of England.
But let's stick with the Treasury because that's what you're responsible for. But you say hundreds of thousands of jobs.
Yeah.
But we only lost several 100,000 jobs when we lost 7% of our GDP after 2008. So why would a 0.1, and I say again, 0.1% fall in GDP in any one quarter mean the loss of hundreds of thousands of jobs?
Because that's what the Treasury forecast says, and it's backed
No, I know that, but I'm asking you why.
Because when the economy goes into recession, people lose their jobs.
Not by 0.1%.
Yes, it's true. Yes,
well, let's move on.
And let me know.
Let's move on to another question, because this 0.1% fall in GDP, you're quite right, for 4 quarters, but it's 0.1 each quarter. That also assumes that the government and the Bank of England take no remedial action, do nothing to counter recession. Correct?
I would like to unite and to reunite Europe, because a standalone philosophy and the standalone policy being put into place by member states will lead to no kind of success.
Because all these challenges we are facing today need European solutions. We need to reinvent on sovereignty on the European level, because we don't integrate enough. Unify everything. A Europe that is integrating more, that can only be solved on the continent.
You've got thousands and thousands of bureaucrats, civil servants and administrators, and their job is to push paper, write on paper, have rules on paper, pile up more and more paper. You just get a mass of growing telephone directory size rules and regulations, one after the other, ceaselessly, endlessly. That is actually what the bureaucracy sees itself as there to do.
If the list of EU rules could be put into one document today, it would take more than 2 men to carry it on. Such a document would reach as high as Nelson's column. Regulation is so vast and complex, even the EU is unable to tell us how many laws there are covering different areas of our lives. So we've used some helpful EU databases to make the best estimate we can. Here is regulated EU man waking from his regulated slumber to start his regulated day. You wouldn't think you'd need a law for pillow cases, but the EU has 5. But that's nothing. The pillow inside is subject to 109 different EU laws. As far as we can tell, there are only 11 EU laws pertaining to radio alarm clocks. There's around 400 governing the other stuff on Joe Citizen's bedside table. You can't be too careful with duvets and sheets, so there's around 50 laws governing those. There are 65 laws governing bathrooms, but that doesn't include the contents. How they managed to think up 31 laws for toothbrushes is beyond me. But let's face it, toothpaste is a bit weird, so 47 laws sounds about right. Mirrors have been known to crack and get dirty, so they're covered by 172 laws. As for the shower, well, we've all seen Psycho. Murdering girls like that is now strictly prohibited. Shampoo can get in your eyes and cause discomfort, 118 laws. EU bureaucrats seem terrified by towels for some reason, slightly more relaxed about radiators. There are 1,246 laws relating to bread, but just 52 covering the crazy anarchic toaster. Just 84 laws cover fridges, but an impressive 12,000 laws cover milk. After all, it might go off. Bowl, 99 laws. Spoon, more than 200 laws, same for the orange juice. But the coffee, whoa, stand back, Grandma. This toxic jungle juice can keep you up all night. The best dog in Britain is unaware of the odourless fog of canine legislation, but careful Ruby, ignorance is no excuse. Our regulated man leaves his regulated house. There are only 92 laws about pavements, after all they're just pavements, but you get the idea. EU regulation surrounds us like invisible barbed wire. When we're frustrated in our daily lives by needless, stupid EU laws, it's infuriating. But it's much worse than infuriating if you're thinking of starting a new business. It's like entering a legal minefield.
For small and medium-sized businesses and startups, it's perilous. Complying with regulation imposes huge costs, and falling foul of regulation can put you out of business.
Let's all say the same thing.
Prime Minister,
about the economic...
Your scaremongering does not stop at the economy, does it? What comes first, World War III or the global Brexit recession?
Germany is facing a drastic number of refugees by the end of 2015, believed to be in the region of 1.5 million.
It is not quite on a biblical scale, but an exodus it certainly is. Migrants who've been trapped at the railway station in Budapest now deciding to walk the hundreds of miles to Germany and what they see as the promised land.
The other side of this tragedy is how it will change Europe. Non-Western migrants had already been flooding into Europe for decades. Leaders refused to stop it.
We are afraid. We are in danger every day, every minute. They're coming inside, the police. They want to kill each other. You have to do something. Someone has to protect us. They are in our house. We are the victims. We are not them. We have to live life like before. We have to live our life. They took it for us. We're not in war. They are. They have to take them from here. It's a city. It's not a place for people like them.
I think what we've got here is a whole load of things which are going to be announced on June the 24th onwards. And so the European Union has gone quiet. You know, the Greek debt crisis will go ballistic. We'll discover there are proposals for a European army. All kinds of things. We're just waiting until the British people have voted in blissful ignorance, fueled only by George Osborne's dodgy dossiers. And so we just want to wait till June the 24th.
Ein starkes Großbritannien in der Europäischen Union. Um das ganz deutlich zu sagen.
Responding to MEP's calls for a federal Europe, the German Chancellor said that a shift of powers to Brussels would be her long-term vision for Europe.
An anti-austerity demonstration in Brussels organised by European trade unions turned violent close to the Commission and other EU institutions. Weeks before the European elections, the protesters are calling for new policies to tackle unemployment and poverty. Figures published last week showed record numbers of jobless, with around 26 million people in the EU looking for work. As a Euronews team tried to film what was happening, our cameraman was attacked. Our correspondent says the protest started just next to the Euronews office in Brussels. With my cameraman colleague, we tried to go to the street to film. But then the protesters turned angry. They pushed the cameraman back into the entrance, where they hit and kicked him several times. Most of those in the streets were young Flemish workers, many from Antwerp harbour. They represented only a minority of demonstrators, the rest of whom protested peacefully a few streets away. The European Trade Union Confederation is campaigning for investment to kickstart the economy in EU states to create sustainable growth and between 9 and 11 million jobs over the next decade. It hopes the next European Parliament will back the plan.
40 years ago, it was a common market. Now it's a European Union that wants an air force, an army, a navy. I don't want to be part of a European foreign policy.
This is a dangerous fantasy. The idea that there's going to be a European Air Force, a European army, it is simply not true. Simply not true.
The European Union should have its own army to convey a clear message to Russia, says Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker.
Now it's a European Union that wants an air force, an army, a navy.
The plans for a European army. That's the claim on the front page of the Times today. The EU defence plans, drawn up by the EU's foreign policy chief, apparently won't be discussed by national governments until, strangely, after next month's referendum on June the 23rd. Now, we did ask, as you would expect us to do, to speak to someone from the European Commission in Brussels, but they told us nobody was available. Well, it is a Friday. But let's speak to our two guests about it. How strong do you think that this story is?
Well, I'm a great admirer of my own paper, and it's a terrific headline, but I think when you read a little deeper into it, this is actually about trying to get more strategic cooperation between EU nations. It's not really about setting up an EU army. And I think the fact that there's going to be more strategic cooperation can only be a good thing. The EU's been completely taken by surprise by events like Libya.
There is quite
Syria.
widespread support, though, for a military dimension to the EU, isn't there?
That is a different question, whether there should be an EU army from whether there is going to be one. I mean, nobody's pushing for an EU army.
Well, the Germans have got a white paper coming up on it, but they've postponed it till July.
But what they're talking about is more strategic cooperation between nations. They're not talking about a standing army which belongs to the EU, which is deployed solely by the EU Commission or any other.
But it's
about member states pulling together.
Well, Martin Schulz, he's the President of the European Parliament. if we wish to defend our values, if we wish to maintain the security of our citizens, the majority of MEPs consider we need an HQ for civil and military missions in Brussels and deployable troops. Jean-Claude Juncker, he's the President of the European Council. Such an army would help us to build a common foreign and national security policy. It would show Russia we're serious when it comes to defending the value of the European Union. And the German Defence Minister, the European army is our long-term goal. First, we have to strengthen the European Defence Union. And the European Commission, in June of last year, European defence integration is no longer just a political option, but a strategic and economic necessity. That's what they want.
They may want an EU army in the future, but that's not what's being proposed now. What's being proposed now is more coordination one at a time. There may be an EU army in the future, but it's not imminent.
Brussel verandert even in een slagveld, wanneer de betogers, vooral gravenarbeiders en metaalarbeiders, zich tegen de politie keren. De politie staat gewoon machteloos. Ze kunnen niets anders dan zich terugtrekken. Verschillende agenten geraken gewond. De betogers maken er een spel van. Ze dagen de politie echt uit. Ze gooien met alles wat ze te pakken krijgen. De politie laat 4 waterkanonnen aanrukken in de hoop zo terug controle te krijgen over de situatie. De betogers die wijken niet. Auto's die geparkeerd staan langs de kant van de weg worden gewoon vernield. Het duurt uiteindelijk 3 uur voor het weer rustig wordt.
Imagine we had £350 million more to do with as we wanted every week. Well, that's what we're told we could save if we left the European Union. It's a huge amount of money, enough to build and open a brand new hospital. It's half of England's school budget, 4 times Scotland's schools budget, and 4 times our nationwide science budget. Amazing. Douglas Carswell, is that the right figure?
It is an enormous amount of money, isn't it? £350 million a week. Now, there's been some dispute from the other side in this campaign who've been suggesting that somehow this figure is inaccurate. Now, I want to show you, Suzanne, that it is a mathematical fact that every week we give control of £350 million to Brussels. Now, I have here from the UK Statistics Authority, no less, confirmation that the gross contribution to the EU in 2014 was £19.1 billion. £19.1 billion. Let's put that here. 19.1 billion. Now, there are, of course, 52 weeks in a year. So let's divide that figure by 52. I hope the Remain campaign isn't disputing the number of days in a week or the weeks in a year, but it is a mathematical fact that if you do that sum, and again, I refer people to the UK Statistics Authority, who have a proven calculators. The total amount per week that we give control to the European Union is actually, if anything, slightly higher than the figure the Vote Leave campaign is using. It is 367 million. That is an enormous amount of money, and that is an indisputable mathematical fact.
I think the reason we have 350 million is because it's been done over a 5-year average, so that's the slight discrepancy there. But Douglas, we get some of that money back, don't we, from the European Union, who give us money for technology projects, for engineering, the environment, universities, and so on and so forth.
To be fair, we do get some of that back, and that's why we talk about this gross figure. The net figure is because we do get some of it back. But think about it. If for every £2 you gave someone, you got £1 back, I don't think you'd regard that as a particularly good deal. And that's what happens with this money. We get some of it back, but we're getting back the money on things that aren't our priorities. The money that we're getting back isn't being spent by us. In other words, we're handing control of £350 million to Brussels, and I think that is wrong.
But what about the rebate? I mean, there's no doubt that we'd be better off spending that money and spending it ourselves, but we have a rebate of about £4 billion that we never actually send to the European Union.
Well, it's true, we do get a rebate, which means we're a little bit less ripped off than we would otherwise be. But, you know, the reality is, and again, I look at some of the statistics, the official statistics on this, you know, our contribution to the EU budget has been rising every year since we joined, and in only 1 year, 1975, have we ever got more out of it than we put into it. So much so that if you add up our total contribution since we joined, it's over £500 billion. That's an enormous amount of money over many, many years. Now, of course, the rebate is very vulnerable. When Tony Blair was Prime Minister, he did a deal which reduced the rebate. Having the rebate is no reassurance. It means that control still rests with Brussels. By giving 350 million a week, yes, we get some of it back, but we don't have control over how that money is spent. We don't have control, ultimately, over the rebate.
And there's also, I understand, moves within the European Union to actually take our rebate off us completely. They really don't like the fact that we have it, do they? And of course, our contributions go up and up and up, so that 4 billion becomes an ever more insignificant part of that total.
If people vote to remain in the EU, I think the chances of us getting a better deal are nil, and the chances of us being ripped off grow. Every British Prime Minister has been under pressure to give up the rebate. Tony Blair gave ground. If you want to make sure that we take back control of all of that money, all of that 350 million a week, don't leave it to politicians. Vote to leave on June the 23rd. If we do that, we take back control of this money and just think what we could do with it. In hospitals up and down the country, think what that £350 million a week could do. It is a fact we would be better off out.